Amber Rupe first got involved with hermit crabs in a way familiar to many of us. Her kids were gifted them, Krabby and Houdini, in pet store painted shells. She received little to no instruction on how to deal with them, but set to work learning everything she could about their unique care requirements. As an autistic mom to 3 autistic sons, there were some hurdles to overcome in caring for these lovely creatures. But like so many other animal friends over the years, hermit crabs have become a thriving and happy part of their family household. Please welcome Amber Rupe.
Hello everyone, welcome to CrabCon 2023 and my presentation, Benefits and Challenges of Crab Keeping for the Neuro-Spicy. First, let me explain what I mean by Neuro-Spicy. Neuro-Spicy is just an all-inclusive term for anyone who's neurodivergent. We prefer this term as a simple way to share that we are different when needed while keeping specifics private. My name is Amber. Myself, as well as my 2 sons, have autism and ADHD, and I also suffer from OCD. While I will of course be speaking from our own experiences, many of the hurdles we experience with crab keeping can be felt across the neurodivergent spectrum, as well as the joys and benefits. Some of the points I'll cover in this talk today are as follows. The overwhelming task of feeding, watering, and ways to keep it organized for happy, healthy crabs. Hands off, ways to keep hyper-focus engaging for you and healthy for the crabs. Involving the kids with safety in mind, emotional support animals, different ways you can get involved in the conservation effort. I'd also like to say that in the effort to make sure that my presentation was as accessible as possible to everyone in the neurodivergent community, my video will just be slides. I'll of course show examples of some of the things that I'm talking about, but that way it's not distracting and it's easy for everyone to understand. There's honestly so much that we could talk about, and I hope that I get to see some of you for questions and discussion after. Let's get into it. The overwhelming task of feeding and watering and ways to keep it organized for happy, healthy crabs. Let's be honest here, keeping hermit crabs can be overwhelming for anyone. There's a lot to remember when it comes to their care, especially food and water. They need many, many different types of food, and it's very specific how much of different types of proteins they need, the oils that they need, and the staple foods that they need. So for a neuro-spicy person, it can become completely unmanageable. As I mentioned earlier, neurodivergence is a very large spectrum. Even with the same diagnoses, we can be vastly different. For our household, as well as many of the other neuro-spicy keepers that I spoke to while researching, 2 things are very important. You want things to be simple, and you want them to be visible. Let me explain with some examples. First, and possibly one of the most important things, has been utilizing pre-made mixes from approved sellers. Having a nice stock of them means even during times our neurodivergence is hindering our functioning, we can still be giving our crabs the best care with a complete diet. It is also a tremendous help for those of us with more severe sensory issues related to smells or how things feel. There are many things that the crabs enjoy that I would be completely unable to tolerate preparing for them. For us, food and water looks something like this. All the food is organized in 2 small chests of drawers under my tank. As meals and ingredients that need to be rotated are used, they move to the drawers next door. Once everything has been used, we start all over. Think of it sort of like if you've worked in the restaurant industry and the way that you shuffle your fresh ingredients to make sure that it's always moving along and getting used in the appropriate order. Many keepers use a little bit different of a variation of this and just use a bin and move the foods to the back of the line as they get used. Here's another example from one of the other keepers I spoke to. Another absolutely fantastic way to track not only foods, but your crabs themselves is the choya log. Not only does each crab get their own page where you can track their size, their shell, foods that they like, but there's a space for every day in the month that's completely perfect to write down food. You could also write down your water changes or when you've added prime. For my house personally, I have to see things like in front of my face all the time, or they just don't even exist. So for water changes or days that I've added prime or days that I've changed out my staples, I do something like this and use a dry erase marker, and it just gets written directly on my tank. That way I can't miss it, and it is always in my eyes. As I mentioned before, if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. And that's very important for a great deal of other neurodivergent people as well. These are all very simple ways to keep track of all of the foods that we're feeding, when the water changes are happening, to make sure that we always have happy, thriving crabs. Hands off. Ways to keep hyperfocus engaging for you and healthy for the crabs. So first, let's talk a little bit about what hyperfocus means. In the autism community, that would be called a special interest. And what it really means is just that this person has just a ferocious need to just be enveloped in whatever the subject matter happens to be. It could be hermit crabs. It could be, my youngest son is it's spiders, which is horrifying because I have been an arachnophobic person for my whole entire life. And I've had to get over that recently because he's just completely obsessed. Everything is about that thing. So it's not just something that you enjoy. Of course, neurotypical people can experience hyperfocus. But it's not as common, and it's generally not as focused. I'm not really sure how else I could put that. Just it's very different for a neurodivergent person. Your whole life is this thing. Now, when we're talking about crab keeping, these are hands-off pets. You don't want to touch them a lot. You don't want to be in their housing a lot. That can really, really drastically hurt your humidity. And in the end, it's really dangerous for your crabs. So what can we do to still enjoy our hyperfocus and keep our crabs safe and well? One thing that came up a lot in the community as a whole, not just in my own household, is building things for them. Other than my food and water dishes, everything within my tank I've built myself. I made all the climbs and ladders, made all the neat little huts and places to go across, and we do that throughout the month. And this way I get in the habitat as little as possible. The crabs still get new things, and I still keep myself busy in a way that's not harmful to my crabs. We do similar things with the boys. They can help build things, or they can help with us feeding. We'll talk a little bit more later about ways that we can get smaller kids with things like autism involved, that they will be safe as well as the crabs will be safe. Another thing to consider would be making your own food mixes. If you don't have sensory issues with some of the weirder food things that hermit crabs need to have in their diet, then making your own food mixes can be a great way to engage your hyperfocus or special interest and do something wonderful for the crabs without actually handling and being in the crabitat. Now, along those same lines, let's talk about how to safely involve kids that are on the spectrum. The reality of this is that it can look simply the same way that it looks for us. They can help us do things like prepare the food. My older child, who is capable of using knives and the tools to prep, can help me prep the fresh foods. The smaller boy helps me pick out what foods we're going to use from the drawer that night. They both can help me build things for the habitat. All of these things are great ways that they can be involved without actually handling the crabs. Now, this next part really ties in closely with involving the kids, so I'm going to sort of wrap them in together in the effort to save time and cover as much as we can here. So the next subject would be emotional support animals. Now, when people think of an emotional support animal, I'm so sure that hermit crabs is not what comes to mind. But hear me out here. Crabs really are wonderfully simple to take care of once you take care of all of those overwhelming bits and pieces, the diet needs and the other care needs that can be a lot. When you figure out a great way to keep that organized and keep that running smoothly, it really, really is an easy thing to do to keep these wonderful little creatures. And there really are so many benefits to having these lovely crabitats in your home, especially for a Neuro-Spicy person. And for us, we're a whole Neuro-Spicy house. We outnumber the neurotypical people here. Things can get very hectic, very loud, very overwhelming, very quickly, depending on what is going on in our lives. And we honestly do depend on our crabs a great deal to pull many of us out of that overwhelmed, non-functioning place. Let me explain a little bit and start with some things and exercises that I do with my youngest child when he is in a deep state of overwhelm. Probably his favorite and definitely my favorite once we've reached a point where I can get through to him and speak to him. You know, he can hear me. If you are a Neuro-Spicy person, you probably understand exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're not, for someone especially as little as he is, my youngest is 4 years old, he can absolutely get to a point where he just really doesn't even hear you. He's so overwhelmed and overwrought and often in pain. That's a really hard thing that autistic people often have to deal with, is when you're very overwhelmed, it can be physically painful. And that's very hard to deal with when you're very small. So, of course, we've made sure that he is in a place where he can listen and participate. And we do our breathing and we play Find the Crab. We have a 75-gallon tank with a 40-gallon topper that is just literally in the middle of our living space. And there are 6 crabs that live in there, and we hunt for the crabs. Of course, we don't open the crabitat and look for them, but that's the fun of it. They can be so hard to find, even when there are that many in there. Sometimes it could take us 10 minutes to find a single crab. They're so good at hiding, and it gives us something that we can focus on. We do our deep breaths together and we keep searching until we find them all, or everyone that is up, of course. Sometimes there are crabs that are down, or there might be crabs that are digging. So we find them all to the best of our ability. And that gives him time to focus his mind, calm himself down, and then we can talk about whatever was the issue and adjust whatever we need to adjust. And I'll be honest, this is something that I do often when I'm overwhelmed. It can be very difficult to be an autistic parent of autistic children. And it's much more common than I ever realized. But it's very hard, and it can often be very overwhelming for me. Our overwhelms and things that are bothering us at whatever times, they don't often overlap in the same way, and very often we are in very different places, and that can be really difficult. So the crabs are a huge benefit to us. They're somewhere that we can go, we can watch them, we can relax, we can enjoy their foolish antics, because we all know how silly they are. Crabs falling over for no reason is a real thing, and it's just something that gives us a place where we can focus, we can relax, we can find that place again where we can understand what's going on and remember how it is that we need to cope and just get generally calmed down. A lot of the other benefit for me really comes down to it gives me a place where I can put that hyper focus. It's something that I really enjoy. I love to learn about them. I love to read about them. I'm not always very boisterous out in the community because that's very hard for me. Part of the issues that I deal with are really, really crippling anxiety. And so even just asking a question is very difficult. But I spend huge amounts of time reading. I have all of Stacy's books. I have the foraging book. It gives me something that I can focus on. There's always something to learn. There's always more to read. There's always more I could build or ways that I could make their home better. And then there's always things that you could get involved in the conservation effort, which is the next thing that we're going to talk about. For many of us on the Neuro-Spicy spectrum, we suffer from crippling anxiety. So doing things like the local representatives program or speaking out at events is just not something that we can manage. So let's talk about ways that we can get involved that still really, really help with the effort and maybe people don't think about so much. The first and probably the most obvious would be to donate. You can go to lhcos.org and donate to the different programs that they run there. And of course, that is incredibly helpful. Don't buy wild-caught crabs. Get crabs from the adoption program. Purchase crabs from the captive breeding program. Both of those things help a great deal in keeping wild crabs wild. Another thing that we can do is support the people who are getting loud, the people who are out there putting in the work, raising their voices, and doing the things that need to be done. That helps exponentially. The more that we can support them, the more effort that they can put in to saving wild crabs. We can also donate items like shells to the crustacean plantation and hermit house for the breeding program, or items to claws in the classroom. I'm an artist and I personally am trying to brainstorm up something that I could create that could be sold and the proceeds could be donated to LHCOS or Hermit House. There's very many things that we can do that don't have to be those loud public things that can be so helpful, so you can still feel like you're supporting the conservation effort without putting yourself in a position that's going to be harmful to you. I think that's just about all the time that I have for this part of the talk. I tried to cover as much as I possibly could. I hope some of you are going to stay for the live portion afterwards with any questions, or maybe we can just have some nice discussion, and I really look forward to that. I appreciate you coming to my presentation. I hope that it has been helpful, and I look forward to speaking to everyone afterwards. Thank you.